Banking giant Morgan Stanley has agreed to pay $10 million after regulators discovered that the bank wasn't complying with anti-money laundering regulations. You know, here again, how many times have we done the story on HSBC? Let me lay it out real quick. They've heard it before. I think this is such a critical story. Bankers now have figured out that laundering money is very profitable. Who are they laundering it for? We found HSBC and a half a dozen other banks that were laundering money for drug cartels. They knew that, Mexican drug cartels. We found banks that were laundering money for terrorist cells all over the world. They knew they were laundering money. They knew it was causing, you know, Americans' deaths, soldiers' deaths. They knew that. As a matter of fact, here's what really bothers me about this story. Maybe you can help me on this. You know who the people were behind the deal that was worked out with HSBC? I mean, this sweetheart deal where they paid $1.9 billion on HSBC. Nobody went to prison. They signed a document that admitted to criminal conduct. 12 elements of criminal conduct that anybody else would be in prison today for. You know who cut the deal? Mueller, Loretta Lynch, and Comey. I want you to think about that. You always hear about this inside game that exists in Washington. Who are these people that move from board of directors here to board of directors there? They move out of justice and move to this board of directors case story. So all of a sudden, we're now looking at this and we find out that the people who actually negotiated this, made it happen, was Mueller, who now is investigating Trump and I guess everybody else in the country. This is the guy that cut the sweetheart deal with HSBC.
Right.
So give me your take on how are we affected when we say to Morgan Stanley, gee, guys, we know you're laundering money, pay $10 million and go your way. What's your reaction to that?
Right. They had, you know, after the big banking collapse, these new rules were put in place that said this is what banks you're legally required to do to make sure you're not laundering money for terrorist or drug cartels. And for 6 years, Morgan Stanley just wasn't doing it. And they had tens of billions of dollars coming through their bank that they knew this was probably dirty money. They can't say for sure that it was or wasn't, but they knew that it probably was. And so now they say, okay, well, you've made billions off this. Right. So we're gonna have to fine you 10 million with an M, not billion with a B, after they made billions in profits from not complying.
Here's what I think is even more important. Morgan Stanley knew that HSBC and a half a dozen other banks had been caught.
Right.
Dirty, filthy hands where they're caught laundering money for terrorists. They're caught laundering money for drug cartels in Mexico. They get away with it because Mueller, Loretta Lynch, and Comey say, well, gee, we can work out a deal here, can't we? You pay $1.9 billion. Nobody gets prosecuted. Not one soul was prosecuted in that case, even though HSBC had to sign off on a document. There were 10 elements, all admitting, yes, we engaged in criminal conduct. Yes, we knew that what we were doing was wrong. Yes, we knew that because of what we were doing, Americans were being killed. That's how serious this is. Now, Morgan Stanley says, well, God, I guess, you know, since nobody was prosecuted, I guess we can get away with it. Unless you throw these cats in prison, culture doesn't change. Right. HSBC takes place. We know they're criminals. They committed criminal conduct. Morgan Stanley looks at that. They say, oh, all they had to do was pay $1.9 billion. And, oh, by the way, they made $20 billion. So why don't we do the same thing?
It's a great investment.
It's a really good investment if you think about it. Farron Cousins, thanks for joining me. These stories every week get stranger and stranger.